Morisco influence and Hoodoo. Talismans. The most widespread practice among the Moriscos was the making and possession of talismans. The difference between an amulet and a talisman is that an amulet or fetish is a natural object that is considered a vehicle of supernatural forces and that protects against all evil indiscriminately, while a talisman is artificial, based on processes of abstraction and logical associations, and requires special conditions during its making. Its use is also specialized and it has a specific purpose. An amulet is more primitive while a talisman is more elaborate. In this sense, it seems to me that we cannot speak of Morisco amulets in any case, but rather they are always talismans. According to a marginal note in the Moorish manuscript, a good Muslim should never go without amulets, because a person without them is like a house that cannot be closed because it has no door. Anyone who wants to enter a house without a door, the devil enters from all sides of a person who goes without amulets. These talisman amulets, to be exact, were frequently called Moorish lis or herses, a word derived from the Arabic hers, which means amulet, guard, protection. We know of many Moriscos who have been persecuted for making them or carrying them, among those persecuted for making them and giving them to other people. I can cite as an example Joan Samburak, a resident of Brunel, who confesses to having given around 30 paychecks to Moriscos from Villa Marchant Antella, Albalat de Villarasa, and Sumacari in 3 years, and that for this they gave him some money, others flour, others bread, all for the love of God, and that these paychecks were made to cure fevers and other illnesses, and because he was in great need and poor to help his children. Mojo bags. The most common type of heresy was written on paper, which was folded and placed in a cloth bag, sewn in wax, covered and turned by another cover. This one generally made of better cloth in bright colors, preferably red. There were those made of crimson velvet, red zarzahan, satin, cloth, white canvas. One was made of white and green cloth with a gold skyrico. They were carried in the pocket hung around the neck or also sewn to clothing. To the doublet, often under the arm, these bags could have contained one or more of these papers. But some also contained other objects whose symbolic or magical value must have contributed to increasing the strength of the talisman. For example, the one found on Esperanza Ganon from the suburb of Ativa contained herb seeds, peppercorns, races of herbs, rue seeds, and some straws with small pieces of iron. The bag belonging to Angela Marat, a resident of Albalat, contained some shredded herbs and 2 silver cutters. In that of Leonor Pisobla, the resident of Val du Ugo, some flakes of unknown herbs and straws, all piece of wire used as rosary cord were found. And that of Beatrice Agaito from Attilan contained many small pieces of colored woolen cloths and a cap in colored silkwork. The heresy itself was written on paper or parchment with black or red ink, and frequently with a yellow ink made from rose water and saffron. The latter was apparently more potent. Curiously, saffron, which will appear again in other spells, seems to be a favorite for magical purposes. Purposes of practice. The Moriscos themselves inform us about the purposes that prompted them to use heresies. At least in some cases, although the majority of those persecuted, when they found themselves before the Inquisition tribunal, chose to deny that the talisman was theirs and said that they have never seen it in their lives. From the relatively limited testimony of those Moriscos who had to admit Having warned the heresy and explained their purposes, we can deduce that the reasons for its use can be classified into three general sections: protection of health, protection against wounds, and by tradition. Of health. It seems that this was one of the most common purposes for the use of heresies, as demonstrated by the provision recorded by Ignacio de las Casas. Item, we command that no one may write nome or any Moorish prayers for the sick or for other people. Geronimo Recuro, a resident of Colquetana, was carrying one that his mother had given him 12 years earlier, telling him it was good for ailment she had. When he asked if he had felt any better while wearing it, she said no, that the condition is still there, that it is a heart disease. Rafaela Mayer, a resident of Antella, had 2 prescription pads that a doctor had given her, one for her neck and the other for her blood. As she tells us, she had a dry one there, but she put on the prescription pads and they made her worse, and so she took them off, hiding them in her house. Protection against wounds. Pedro Crespi, a neighbor of Manuel, who was almost blind, wore one against the evil eye, and according to him, bringing it here, he saw a little. He is asked if he believes if he owes his improvement to the talisman. He answers that our Lord God did it, and it also seems to him that after bringing it, his eyes were healed, because before he brought it, he couldn't see anything. But that since his eyes were healed after bringing it, it seems to him that the medicine must have been a benefit to him. Hieronymus Pesty was given a heresy for pain he had in his thighs, and afterward he hasn't felt the pain anymore. Leonis Binali, a resident of Zia, carried for defense against any iron weapon, prison, and any job that might be offered to him. Juan Sancho, a resident of Castellon de la Plana, had a warrant that by carrying it he would not be wounded with a sword or a crossbow. Juan Andreas, a resident of Borja, carried one by virtue of which he was to be free from the dangers of the roads. That of Joan Blanco had the property that the one who carried it could not begin or pass stab wounds even if they were given. Other heresies by tradition. Talismanic texts engraved on a metal plate, preferably gold or silver, were also commonly used. Ignacio de las Casas records a prohibition that stipulates that they not wear around the neck patents that some people wear with certain Arabic letters or insignia with a hand in the middle or moons or anything similar, and that any they have made should be unmade within 2 months, and we order the silversmiths not to make them. Miguel Moran from Belregarte was persecuted because in his house 2 silver patents were found, one with the sun painted and the other with a hand in Arabic letters, which are Moorish symbols. Miguel Cordoba, a resident of Plains, had a gold bill of lading with certain Arabic letters written on it from the sect of Muhammad found in his house. Amka and the Evil Eye. This brings us to briefly mention the superstitions related to the hand. We have just seen it engraved on the patents, and we have already seen it painted on some amulets under the name Hand of David. According to references in Maria Zarampa's house in Segorbe, there was a mosque, and in it they had some black and white carved mats blessed by the Alfaqui, and had painted on them the hamka, which are the 5 fingers that represent the 5 commandments of Muhammad. The Moorish women from Granada on New Year's Day painted their hands with him and anointed the doors and pointed to the hand of Muhammad. Father Ignacio de las Casas alludes to the same custom, who tells us, scandalized, that the Moors of Valencia dared to place certain open hands on the walls of their houses were places they wanted, and even next to the crosses as a mockery of them, because that hand is a symbol of their sect, like the cross of our faith. We must not forget that the newborns were also given herzes to protect them from the evil eye. Miguel Net and Chiva gave Moorish prayers and other things written in gibberish to the boys when they were born and to other women. Shared practices. In the field of witchcraft, a curious phenomenon occurs, as we have just seen, the association between old Christians and Moriscos. Christians do not seem to have many qualms about consulting Morisco sorcerers. In the case of a priest who goes treasure hunting in the company of a Morisco woman and other Christians, it is not unique. Thus, we find Morisco sorcerers practicing certain spells from Christian tradition that old Christians have taught them, and conversely, old Christians invoking Muhammad in their practices, as the Moriscos have taught them. In addition to both witchcraft traditions having both common sources, the reciprocal influences between both groups are very important. It is very difficult to distinguish between Christian and Islamic spells. It is quite possible that Caro Borojas indicates we cannot speak of Moorish sorcery characterized by constants in beliefs or practices, and that we must limit ourselves to presenting and studying specific isolated cases of Moorish sorcerers, each with their own motivations, techniques, and magical world. If there are no major points of contact in how spells were cast, in the materials used for them, and in the magic formulas, there are some in the purpose and perhaps in some general procedures. Purpose of spells. Spells are used to cure illnesses, provoke love, discover treasure, and learn about future or distant things. There are also evil spells. Let's now present some examples of the 5 types. Curative, amorous, discovery of treasure, divination of distant future, and evil. Spells. Medicine seems to be one of the fields in which magical activity was most intensely deployed. This began at the time of diagnosis. Gaspar Caudal, a Moorish doctor from Buffalo, made the devil appear in the pot of water. Him the way and where to cure certain sick people by invoking the devil in Arabigan language. We have already seen Roman Ramirez consulting Leodar for the same purpose. A Moorish fruit vendor from Deza who knew about and herbs to cure them would, to determine whether an illness was fatal or not, place a pot of cold water on the sick person's head, pour in a spoonful of molten lead, and depending on the shape it took, decide whether the illness was fatal or not. This practice of cold water and lead is mentioned in other processes from Cuenca and Toledo, carried out by old Christians and seems to be of Christian tradition. Healing practices, they come in various categories and involve witchcraft to varying degrees. Among the most innocent is the custom of going to wash the shirts of the sick at certain fountains, such as the solid fountain on the banks of Darro River in Granada, a custom that, according to Bermudez de Pedraza, was still maintained in 1608. We have already seen, when speaking of talismans, the possibility, based on the power of the word, that the simple act of carrying one could alleviate or cure the illness. As a consequence of this type of belief, healing is also attempted by means of religious or magical words whose characters are diluted in a liquid that in the patient is made to ingest so that they act more directly on the affected organ. Maria Ruiz, a Moorish woman from Granada, settled in Colcatena. In order to cure some diseases, she used superstitions and named some unknown names and spoke of demons and gave some papers written in wet Arabic and made the sick drink them and told whoever was going to drink, the drink not to cross it. Francisco de Cordoba, a Moorish doctor from Toledo, resorted to the same procedure. When he went to cure Don Antonio Mexico de Tovar, who was bewitched, among other things, he gave him some written and cut little cards and had them soak in the wine or water that the aforementioned Don Antonio was going to drink. Some of these little cards are included in the summary of the case. They contain Surah of the Quran. By another occasion, he wrote the Hail Mary in black ink on a plate and then diluted it with water and poured it into a jug with more water for the sick person to drink. Curative spells. A recipe for fever can be cited here, a document in Arabic that is preserved in the trial against Jamie Bolix, a resident of Alfondeguilla de la Valdeuxo, which consists of writing some magic words on a blue linen cloth, wrapping a chicken egg in it, and roasting it over the fire without the cloth burning. The patient then has to eat the egg, and the shell, wrapped in the cloth, is hung around their neck. Another of the usual means used in healing were incense, fumigations whose purpose was to drive away the demon that caused the illness, making it leave the patient's body. Roman Ramirez used several to cure Anna Sands, a resident of Aldea del Pozo, who was possessed by the demon. He sent one with which he managed to get the demon to leave, telling him, "Get out of there, Roman orders it, and if not, we'll have to incense him with this thing he sent. Look, Roman orders you to get out of there, and if not, he'll make you leave and come to get you out." Faced with such terrible threat, the demon chose to leave because, as we are told, the incense Roman used had an unbearable stench and seemed to be made of shoe soles and sandals. In reality, they were composed of liquid storax, asafoetida, juniper, oil, and ground sulfur. Amorous spells. Magical practices aimed at bringing about certain amorous achievements must have been frequent, although the references to them that I have been able to find in the inquisitorial documentation are not very numerous, perhaps given the more intimate nature of these purposes. There is the case of Maria de Santa Ana, who, to induce people to engage in love, she would cast many spells, especially one where she spoke to demons in a mirror, where they would give her answers and she would see their friends of the figures who consulted her and make them see their figures. One of them, upon seeing the figure, so lifelike and natural, became frightened and said, "Jesus, Mother of God, verbum caro factum est." And what is this, sister? This art is from the devil, thereby ruining the spell. The Moorish woman scolded her and pushed her away from the slap, telling her that it was no good for that it would get her nothing since she was invoking Jesus. Furthermore, the same witness made little papers to induce love and gave them to women. On one occasion, she also gave some man a small piece of paper written in gibberish that was good for reaching a woman by touching her. But instead of tasting it, they went to confession, then burned it. In the trial against Juan Gadiano, a Moorish resident of Algelita, the accusing witness explains that while he was in Albarazin, a certain man came to him and told him that he had been infatuated with a maiden for a long time and could not attain her, and that he knew that in the kingdom of Valencia there was a famous sorcerer, and that he should go to him so that he could give him a remedy. And the witness went to Argelita and took the accused to Albarazin, who accused, and the one who was infatuated entered a tower and stayed there for a long time. And then the accused told the witness that he had already given him a remedy to obtain and attain the same maiden. and that he had given him some letters and some powders. According to another witness, the powders were to be poured into the maiden's drink, and when the accused was asked if what he had done would be effective, he replied that it would be so effective that the maiden would have no rest in her heart until she saw herself with the one who desired her. And the one who was in love had said that if he said the words the accused had said to him, he would bring the evil down in whatever way he wished. In this case, we do not know the outcome. Having given the said powders and letters, the one who was trying to caught up with the same maiden who lost her mind and threw herself out of a window below and died. Discovery of treasures. The greed for riches, desire of all times, was also present in the 16th century. However, that naturally such greed is exclusive to the Christian or Morisco sphere, just as it is not exclusive to a specific social or cultural level. Inquisition documentation shows that one of the purposes of witchcraft practices was to disenchant or discover treasures. The results of such searches were generally bad. The treasures did not appear, and many of the seekers ended up in the Inquisition. Geronimo Zepp, a resident of Adizenada, was accused of having books of enchantments, spells, sorceries, invocations of demons, and superstitions against our holy Catholic faith, and that using them the defendant and others had gone to a certain house to discover a treasure in a room and measured it with a hemp rope first from east to west and then from north to south at noon, and then it had a picture and some papers with some characters, and that it had no effect. Don Cosme Aben-Nemir, a resident of Benaguazil, indulging in a sorcery and witchcraft, brought from the Val de Alda a demon summoner, whom the Moors call Nadara, a seer, to find him and extract a treasure that Don Cosme's predecessor mayor had placed underground. Miguel Ramirez from Deza used demons to search for treasures, and according to the trial, his mastery was such that he not only knew how to find them, but also how to make them disappear. Among others prosecuted in Quinqueca for searching for treasures were Luis Benali, Alfaqui of Baramasin, Salvador, a slave from Granada, and Alvaro Vazan. They believed so much in the possibility of finding treasures that attached so much importance to them that Geronimo Rochet and Miguel Zelet went so far as to become enemies with Cosme Chicala, alderman of Pals, because he had taken from them a cedula written in Algiers to extract treasures. Evil spells. Most of the practices we have seen so far were intended to avoid evil or to obtain good, without in theory harming one's neighbor. But there were also some intended to channel negative feelings to vent hatred and satisfy revenge. They are less common than the others, but they also exist and they involve similar procedures. We have already seen how a talisman placed in a tube protects the house against demons. But that same tube with different contents could produce worse effects. Gaspar Feina was accused of knowing how to put a letter in Arabic in a reed tube, and if he wanted to harm someone, he would throw it into their house and their animals would die or other greater harm would come to them. Death is a fully realized curse. La Mora, a North African resident of Flix, told certain people to forgive her, that she had killed their children. The curse, not entirely successful, causes the illness. On one occasion, Francisco de Cordova was called from Vallecastin to go and cure a gentleman who was mad with love for a woman. When night fell, he and two servants of the aforementioned sick man went to the door of the house of the wife of the one who they understood had harmed the aforementioned sick man, and they went looking for holes around said door, And one of them said, "Servants found a dead, dried toad in a hole, and it had on it something like the clods and hair all kneaded together and already dry. And they brought it up from the house of the aforementioned sick man and burned it all by his order and threw it out into the street." Francisco Cordero, a resident of Dos Aguas, was accused by a witness of having Arabic books and speaking with demons, and that he was a sorcerer and spoke with the shadows among himself and read from one of the said books, making many grimaces. The witnesses understands that he spoke with demons because he told him that by his order they had to arrest him and that he was a traitor and that he had no more than an hour left before they arrested him. And he testified that he was so skilled in sorcery that if he took a hair or clothing from someone, he would sorcerer them and their children. It is no surprise then that Catalina de Mora, a resident of Quintanar, when her husband shaved or cut his hair or nails, would carefully gather everything up and throw it into the fire. We have just seen the grave dangers to which they were exposed and had they fallen into the hands of an enemy. Glass bottles and trees. What is it? Today it's considered a sea island decoration that symbolizes good luck and a bountiful harvest or garden. The use of bottle trees, however, is another spiritual Gullah tradition with Black American roots that dates back centuries. Originally created by caping the end of crepe myrtle tree branches with bottles, and the tree was especially significant to slaves dating back as far to the Old Testament, symbolic of freedom. The blue bottles, which are mostly a rich cobalt blue, which can also be tied on, are meant to capture evil spirits prior to entering one's home. The haints or spirits who travel in the night, once captured, become stuck in the bottles. If wind blew across the bottles causing it to hum, it's believed that it was the spirit's efforts to escape by swirling within the bottles. With the rising of the morning sun, the captured spirits would be destroyed. Why myrtle trees? Although native to China, crepe myrtles have set deep roots in our southern soil. Becoming a part of our landscape and traditions, plant explorer and botanist Andre Machado introduced it to Charleston around 1786, and it quickly became a southern favorite. In the Bible, there are several references to the myrtle tree. It's mentioned in various contexts, particularly in relation to biblical rituals and as a symbol of prosperity. One notable ritual involving the myrtle tree is found in the book of Nehemiah, where the people of Israel celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles by constructing temporary shelters using branches of myrtle trees. This ritual served as a reminder of God's provision in the harvest season. Additionally, the myrtle tree is often associated with prosperity and blessing. In the book of Zechariah, it's mentioned that God will restore Jerusalem and bring prosperity to his people, symbolized by the myrtle tree. The myrtle tree represents the flourishing and abundance that God desires for his people. Why bottles? According to tradition, the jinn's confinement in said bottle was because of Solomon. As some of the jinn remained true to Solomon and Allah, others became evil and rebellious. To punish the evil ones, Solomon used his power to trap them in various flasks/bottles. Thus, when a person discovers a jinn, they are not automatically guaranteed a servant who will grant all their wishes. They may have to cleverly fight for their lives. Cobalt oxide in various quantities is the main ingredient that creates the vivid blue color seen in American-made bottles, predominantly in the mid-20th century. Three of the most common products sold in cobalt blue glass during the time were Milk of Magnesia, Vicks products, and Bromo Seltzer. Why the color blue? A typical Nazar is made of handmade glass featuring concentric circles or teardrop shapes in dark blue, white, light blue, and black, occasionally with yellow/gold edge. The bead is made of a mixture of molten glass, iron, copper, water, and salt, ingredients that are thought to shield people from evil. According to the Turkish belief, blue acts as a shield against evil and even absorbs negativity. In 1773, Augusta, Georgia land secession meeting where Creek and Cherokee Indians ceded land to white settlers in repayment of debt. He also followed the surveying party through the wilderness. On this journey, he described the Creek Indians as armed with guns in their left hand and tomahawks in their right, loudspeakers, evening pipe smokers, and late sleepers. He later visited many of their villages where he found them to welcome visitors and the men to be tender toward their women and children. Bartram said the Creek men were nearly as tall as the Cherokee, with fine features and alkaline noses. However, the women, with their large, high arched brows, were sometimes little more than half the size of the men. The chest and muscular arms of the ancient chiefs, Mikos, were blue with puncture-based lead or indigo paintings depicting the sun, moon, or planets on the chest with scrolling or belts around the trunk, arms, thighs, and legs. Sometimes sections were divided up for artwork or of animals, landscapes, and battle scenes. Settlers and soldiers under attack by Creek braves reported that the braves painted their faces half in black and red war paint. Origins of blood and spaghetti. Purveyors of love, magic materials in medieval and early modern Iberia lived at the margins of society. They were young, unmarried women, widows, wives abandoned by their husbands, or women living in casual unions with men. They were maids and servants, sometimes prostitutes, and in southern Spain, often Moriscas, women of mixed Spanish and Moorish blood. They were poor or old or disabled, and their practices ran counter to Catholic orthodoxy. Still, they performed an important social function, providing women with the means to exert control over their husbands. Tradition of marginalized groups selling magical substances continued in colonial Mexico. The substances and rituals themselves were often Iberian in character, but their purveyors included mulattoes, mestizos, and indios hechizosos. As Bachar notes, in colonial Mexico, the idea of the witch procress took on a further cultural elaboration, with uncanny power being ascribed to women of marginal Indian and mixed castes. Yet there was nothing inherently witchy about the women who procured love magic substances in colonial Mexico. Witches and magic were European constructs which Spaniards imposed on marginalized groups. In both Spain and its colonies, in other words, marginalization produced magic. The notion of marginality allows us to understand how non-Iberian women came to be associated with magic in colonial Mexico, how they took advantage of this association, and why the substances they used were symbolically significant. Bahar writes that typically women made their men eat their witchcraft, using their power over the domain of food preparation for subversive ends, a practice that was common in pre-Hispanic times as well as in the 16th and 17th century Castile. Citing from the same page from the Florentine Codex, Amos Megd writes, menstrual blood mixed with drinks of cocoa and Palik was one of the most striking among their centuries repertoire, and may have originated from pre-Columbian indigenous practices rather than its counterpart in Europe, as the Franciscan chronicler San Hogan informs us. Origins of the High John root. What is it? Folklore tells us that John, also known as John the Conqueror or Juan el Conquistador, fell in love with the devil's daughter Lilith for John to win the daughter's hand in marriage. The devil challenged him to plow 60 acres and a half a day and sow the acres in the second half of the day. Lilith gave John a magical axe and plow to complete the task, but also admitted the devil meant to kill John even if he did complete the task. Wily and clever, John stole the devil's horse, and he and Lilith both escaped. In the stories, John and Lilith returned to Africa, both agreeing to never again use their powers so the devil would not be able to find them. But John left his powers in America in the root of a southern plant, jalap, a powerful plant species introduced to the slaves by American Indians. John the Conqueror root is now a staple of African American folk magic. How is it used? One only has to possess the root of the plant John the Conqueror, and John the Conqueror's powers of luck, love, and success can be yours. Now, the most famous root in the world, High John the Conqueror root symbolizes enduring courage, success, and laughter. Used externally in the practice, internally, it is a powerful laxative. The root can be carried as a talisman or can be incorporated into other charms and spells. The dried root can also be carried with you as a talisman. Carry High John root in a green bag to draw luck, money, and power. Carry the root in a red bag with the lock of hair of the one you admire to draw his or her love. The talisman is also said to stop depression, draw courage, and protect one from hexes and spells. What is jalap? Jalap is an annual twinning plant that grows in the warm areas of North America and in Mesoamerica. It is found in only one part of Mexico. The name jalap is derived from the town of Jalapa in Mexico, where the plant grows abundantly. Wild jalap is very similar to Aponia jalapa and grows in an area between what are now Florida and Ontario and as far as west as Texas. American Indians use both types of jalap as a powerful remedy for constipation. They steep the root to cleanse its resins in order to make a tea that was taken orally. The Spaniards were so impressed by jalap's effectiveness as a cathartic that they introduced the medicine to Europe from Mexico in 1565. Jalap quickly became a popular constipation and indigestion remedy both in Europe and in North American colonies, where people used it as a treatment for dropsy. Jalap was administered with cream of tartar every 2 hours. It remained a standard part of American pharmacology until the early 1900s. Because of the action of jalap is so powerful that it can cause hypercardia, rapid heartbeat, if misused. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has classified it as a dangerous remedy. Juan the Conquistador. The strange story of a Negro slave from Puebla who became both a Spanish conquistador and the feudal lord of tributary Indians, distant Chile, quite surely deserves a place in early history of Negro slavery in the New World. This curious document, published here for the first time in any language, fills an important gap in the biography of Juan Valiente, the lone Negro conqueror of Chile, who presumably after leaving his master in 1533 and joining up in Guatemala with Pedro de Alvarado's famous expedition to Peru in 1534, distinguished himself in the Chilean expeditions of both Almagro in 1535 and Valdivia in 1540, in which latter army of only 150 soldiers he served at his own expense, fully equipped, and as the owner of a splendid horse worth between 1,000 and 1,500 pesos. As a reward for his distinguished military service in Valdivia's campaigns against the fierce Araucanian Indians, he was in 1546 granted an estate near the city of Santiago, which he had helped to found. Sometime before 1548, he married Juana de Valdivia, who, to judge by her surname and the custom of the day, may have been a Negro slave freed by her master, the governor
Don Pedro d'Alvivia himself. In April 1550, the governor rewarded Juan Valiente further with a coveted encomienda, or fief of tribute-paying Indians near the city of Concepcion. And in that same year, Valiente commissioned a royal official by the name of Esteban de Sosa to negotiate in Peru and New Spain the purchase of his legal freedom. Sosa returned directly to Spain without honoring his promise, and by that time Alonso Valiente, Juan's former master, living 4,000 miles away in Puebla, finally learned of his slave's whereabouts and took legal steps to claim the wealth which according to the laws at the time belonged to his master. Juan Valiente, the Negro conquistador, had, along with the governor, already perished at the hands of the Indians of 1553 disaster at Tucapel. How did the practice come to America? It may not generally be known that some of the best families in South Carolina are Moors by descent. The blood of the African soon washes out, but that of the Indian and Moor, after a half score of generations, shows itself almost as strongly as ever. The crisp, curling black hair, dark, sad eyes, long silken lashes, and swarthy complexion come up generation after generation. Many of the old Huguenot families down to the present day show strong traces of their Moorish descent. Moors were driven out of Spain upon the conquest of Granada. Thousands of them took refuge in the south of France, carrying with them the art of cultivating the vine and growing silk. After a lapse of years, they were again driven to seek new homes and in large numbers immigrated to South Carolina.